Okay, folks, can we please take our seats so we can start the next session? So, if we're all ready to begin. Okay, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and we're really good at this on the annual reunions, of having a session where we learn more about the place we are. And as I said to you last night, I grew up in East Anglia. I remember having a holiday on the Broads, and I remember feeling a little bit ignorant and thick about not knowing what it's all about, the Norfolk Broads. So for me, I'm absolutely thrilled that we're going to have this next session with the wonderful Andrea Kelly, who has been in this part of the world for a long time now. Andrea, you were at university in Norwich, at University of East Anglia. You've worked on environmental issues for 25 years, I think. You're an expert on the Broads, and I know you're particularly interested in the environmental preservation and safeguarding of these wonderful assets, including engaging with farmers and the wider economy. So we're absolutely in thrall to listen to you for the next chunk of time and then to ask you some questions. Thank you very much for your time, and over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a lovely introduction. And I think we share some of the common values. So listening to a little bit of you speaking with Sir Andrew, that development piece and the environment piece shares so much, doesn't it? You know, we need to continue funding it, we need to value it, and, you know, it is a public good. Okay. So that's me. I work for the Broads Authority, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of sort of the story of the Broads, some of the challenges around the Broads, touching into climate change, which we'll touch with Asha's presentation from the Tyndale Centre. And then I'll talk to you about some of the work that we do, because that will place some colour around. So the Broads is at the bottom end. It's often thought of as a dustbin. Essentially, anything that actually happens in this massive water catchment that is 2/3 of Norfolk and a good slice of northern Suffolk ends up in the Broads. So the development, the fantastic agriculture, the food crops, all of that care that people make across a massive area ends up in the Broads. So if they don't make care, that's a legacy that we need to pick up. And it's very hard to unpick once things have started to unravel. And that's really the story of the Broads in a nutshell. You can see here, well, probably not very well, we've got a number of different opportunities and designated sites. So 25% of the Broads is designated as SSSIs, or sites for special scientific interest, and that goes all the way through to global protections such as Ramsar designation, which is this global flyway, particularly for birds, and really important European designations when they once were, and that's been fit for purpose in our own legislation, the special areas of conservation and the special protection areas. So it's a very rich place, and it's not without its trouble. This is a photo of looking towards the sea there, and you'll be going to Hickling Broad, which is here, and you'll probably get on a boat just up here and travel across the water. And this was in 2023 when it flooded in November, December, and people couldn't flush their loos for 6 weeks over. And lots of people lost their crops in these areas that were arable. The grazing marshes didn't fare too badly, and businesses here at Latham's at Pot Heigham all underwater. So this is going to happen more frequently. So I'm going to give a little introduction, talk about that climate change, and then some of the mitigation adaptation projects that I work with farmers on. So the Broads National Park, our purposes, we've all got purposes, haven't we? Your charter is something. Our sort of Act of Parliament that governs what we do. So we're a little bit different to other national parks. We've got these two key purposes around conservation and promoting understanding in the environment. But this makes us a National Park Plus. So we also take payments from the toll payers who have boats and navigate across the Broads, largely now for recreation rather than the vessels, the commercial vessels that once came into the port of Norwich. So it's mainly that sort of control of navigation. So that makes us very unusual. There's only Loch Lomond that has a similar sort of navigation function within the national parks. We're a planning authority and we're a harbour and port authority. So the population is small. That boundary that you saw is really long and complex. It's like my hand. All those rivers are just the places where are in the Broads. You drive in and you drive out and you think, where was it? And you need to really be on a boat or walking within the mass of Helvergate Marshes, this big estuary that once was. So not many people live within. Certainly a lot of people live around. A lot of people visit. There's sort of 8 million or so priority habitats. So you look across and you think that doesn't occur in many other places. And that confers a lot of priority for government, and lots of the places are designated. There's only 20% of arable, but I've got to say that has nudged up over the recent decades. And these are productive soils that are supplied with water when the rest of, let's look at it out there, is all pretty dry at the moment. So there's a pressure always to plough. And if that public purse does not incentivise the continuation of these landscape protections, then I think, it's a landscape that still remains under threat. So I've talked about the catchment and public footpaths, and, the highest point is 38 metres. So really, not much to say on elevation. We're unusual, aren't we, for all of the... So it's so hard to see, isn't it? I'm so sorry about this. But essentially, if you're looking at habitats and species or designated sites, it's not the same everywhere. It depends who has owned it and what land management they have done that would attract or not attract the species. So there once was a time where the drainage in the Broads was not great. We didn't have electricity, etc., and we struggled to get the water off this massive, great big floodplain. And the wildlife loved that. And pretty much they were everywhere. The lapwing, you might remember the peewit, but everyone's got their term for the lapwing across the whole of the UK. And they were everywhere. And now, really, essentially, you can see that they're just in, this is breeding lapwing, the purple, which you might just be able to see. And they're reduced to just the places that people take that special care to get that water on and to retain that water. Because these pumps now are really powerful and they can evacuate the water really quickly. And that's what they do. And quite often, we're farming or managing that water for the lowest common part of the sequence, which is the arable. The arable wants it dry, the farmer wants that water away, and the wildlife suffers. So there's a continual balance of who speaks the loudest. And of course, that lapwing is not on a board. I'm on a board with the farmers to have that conversation. So it's really important that we're very robust. And these are the designated sites. Again, you can see it's not equal across the whole of that landscape. So, wetlands are really important, aren't they? You walk into a wetland, even if it's in your garden, it's a pond and your eyes are drawn, you see the dragonfly, you see the life, and you look everywhere else and it's more difficult to see it because there's less of it. Wetlands are really rich places. So UEA, we worked with UEA to assess the species, and we've got, 1,500 species of conservation concern, which is quite amazing. But 30% of these, there's no recent record. And that might be because, the Victorian naturalists have disappeared and there's not many people who can really identify all those tiny bugs, because these are not things that have common names. Quite often they're very small little rare things, moths or spiders or flies. So I've been out with recorders trying to encourage more recording, but we think we've lost an awful lot of those, and that's in very recent times. But there are mobile species coming in, arrivals of birds. People might know about rather than the little egrets, we've got great white egrets now, we've got spoonbill, ibises are all coming. So as that climate envelope becomes more like southern Spain, northern Africa on certain days, and the winters are much milder, these species will come in. The ones that are mobile will do well. And of course, we don't own the Broads. The Broads Authority own very little land. It's mainly owned by private farmers. And, as everyone needs development, we indeed need nature-rich ecosystems. I don't know about you. You go into a nature reserve, you go out on Hickling, and you feel your insides relax, don't you? So that health benefit is something that people are very aware of. You can list all these pressures, and that's what we do in our strategies, and here they all are. And I could give you a talk on each one of these, and we could focus in on the invasive species and the challenges associated with that. One lady I was just talking to about water pollution and dog and tick spot-on treatments that are put on, flea and tick spot-on treatments that are put on dogs and cats. And we're finding now with UEA that even though these neonicotinoids have been banned from agricultural use for over 2-3 years, they're still in acute toxicity levels in the Broads, and that's probably because of the dogs jumping in the water, and really if you've had a spot-on treatment on your dog, it shouldn't enter the water for at least a month. And as you handle your dog, that active will be on the fur for 90 days, and you, through your hand washing, and me and everyone, it'll enter through the sewerage works and the wastewater treatment. So all of this is written about in The Guardian and many other, but I don't think people know about it, and they would be horrified to know. So an example, I do stuff on each of these elements with my team. So let's just focus on climate change. So amazingly, the sea level rise since 1901 in this area is already 20 centimetres more. So again, this is the flooding, and I'm going to talk to you about sort of, we've created these basins, we've created these flooding areas. This low subsidence is entirely man-made through our history of drainage and pumping. So Asher is going to focus much more on this in terms of, summer drought and winter warm and wet. But that's certainly, going to happen in the Broads. Perhaps in the coastal margin that's right near the North Sea, there might be a little buffering, a little bit of cooling from the sea, but nowhere is going to escape these trends. So we've got something called the Broadland Futures Initiative. So we've just been through a big sort of flood. There's flood banks all the way through here to a certain point where it stops, and then it becomes a natural reed bed and fen system where the river just bleeds out into the wetland, and there's no river banks at all. And that happens at certain points right through each valley. But everything downstream has got the river embankments. So how on earth are we going to convince people to invest in these river embankments, or even, barriers, or here, very low-lying, this is just a simple sand dune system, all the way through, breachability is massive. Investing in rock groin solutions that might, look terrible, but be necessary to protect this land. So that's a strategy, and we need to talk to people about the costs of all of that, because not many people live in here. And at the moment, if we're talking with government about replacing our pumping infrastructure, which is essential for getting that water out once it's breached into the floodplain, because this is a natural floodplain, we're not denying that. But in order to manage it, they're not investing at the moment. And that's because the funding calculators are all about where people live. It's not about the value of this environment and have we given it enough time to adapt? How many species are we going to lose? Because there are many species that occur just here in the Broads and nowhere else across the whole of the country. So there's a lot for us to think about. So we're going through this process and, it looks at this area. So you're going to be going up into sort of Hickling Broad, which is sort of here, very close. Even if you don't have time to go to the beach, you can sort of see the sand dunes. And on certain days, you'll see hear the crashing of the waves. And this is a whole area was breached in 1953, as was many areas in the Netherlands. Much of the Broads is well below sea level. So in every good plan-making process, you go around a wheel, don't you, and end up monitoring and reviewing. So we're sort of looking at these adaptive pathways at the moment and talking to people at all different sectors about what they want, and that's the process that we're in at the moment. And of course, when we think about actually delivering something on the ground, everywhere's got a bit more intelligent about catchment management and what you can do. So rather than just thinking about barriers near the sea or around the river embankments, it is about replenishing water. So Coca-Cola funds us to get water to infiltrate slowly into the ground and to ensure that those cover crops are there, those small infiltration systems might be there, and the farmer's got the right equipment to ensure that the tram lines aren't delivering water direct and straight down in those big thunderstorms that we get. So this just simply shows that you can do an awful lot to the landscape to alter the pace of the water right through. So it's not just about flooding at the close to the river. So this is a diagram that comes from the Netherlands, and we are very similar to the Netherlands in our thinking. And it demonstrates, if you're a planner, you think, well, what can I do as sea level rise advances? Oh, that's good, isn't it? Fantastic, thank you. We can see it. Oh, brilliant. So as sea level rise gets more and more, there are different pathways we can take, and those pathways can alter. As you can imagine what's going to happen is the government is going to have a huge pressure to protect that infrastructure, those ports, Bacton, where all the gas comes in, very close to where you're going, the port of Great Yarmouth, and all of that is replicated across the whole of our coastal communities. So there's going to be a huge pressure on those sorts of resources. So we're going to have to be adaptive. So looking at sort of advancing the defences is not something that we'll be doing in the Broads. The Netherlands has reclaimed a lot of land. We're not seeking to do that. This is a natural floodplain. It's got to function in that same way. So we're thinking about everything through to complete and utter accommodation of the future, which is quite scary. Imagine if you're living in the Broads and you're told you just have to get used to it. So there's quite a lot we're doing with UEA, the medical centre there, to look at the psychology of that change, particularly with communities around the coast, and of course in the Broads, who are a little bit perhaps buffered from the reality of what's coming. So other climate change related issues, of course, is water scarcity. As you drive around, you see the amount of potatoes, and that all is an irrigated crop. There's a lot of lettuce coming, as I understand it, to Norfolk, and that all needs water to be stored and needs good sort of thinking and strategy around that, because they're not able to abstract during the summer from the rivers or the groundwater. So it's all about reservoir storage and the way that government incentivised that. You might have seen in every part of the UK a lot more deer on the road. The population is just increasing. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. Wildfire in the national parks is rife at the moment. Upland areas are crisp and drying out. So as we get drier, that will also be a threat for us. I've got no strategy on that, so it's something I need to pick up on. And of course, blue-green algae, as it gets warmer, you get more deoxygenation. It's quite a nutrient-rich catchment, and this is an impact that would, affect people's experience. Everyone likes to look into clear water, and no one likes to see blue-green algae. So we're now on to some sort of examples, really, of the Broads. It's a nice, we've got more windmills in the Broads than anywhere else in Europe. They may not be working, and they may be sort of relic structures without sails. I mean, this one is a nice restored one. But so lowland peatland. So amazing. Of the lowland peatland in the UK, 85% of our emissions, of the peatland across the whole of the UK, upland and lowland, 85% of the emissions comes from the lowlands. So you might have heard of peatland restoration and moors for the future, helicopters going in and locking up grips and stopping the erosion features on the upland. Most of it comes from the lowlands. And it's, at the moment, about 3% of the total emissions budget for the UK, of our carbon budget. And that, as other sectors decarbonise, is only going to grow. So as we look at the sort of epochs towards 2050, that's going to be a growing pressure for the government to sort out. So I've benefited from a lot of money from the government to think about how to address that. So this is just a sort of a schematic of looking at a natural wetland with a high water table, and you trace the line and you see how, as you expose the peat to oxygen, it goes up to the atmosphere and the whole of the land shrinks. So we're left in the Broads with this great big bucket. So when, as the sea level rises even more and it spills out across the rivers, we simply can't, accept a bit more wetter environment that would be quite nice and still seeing the grass and the reed. It would be lakes. So this is the legacy that we have received. It's a nice little diagram here that DEFRA have used. I sat on the Lowland Agricultural Peatland Task Force, reported straight to government on the amount of your carbon emissions. So a lot of evidence. So where you're raising your water table here, you're reducing your carbon emissions right through. So this is a diagram of some photos of how deep the peat is. And just recently, the England peat map has been generated by AI, probably. It's certainly not sampling. It takes a lot of time to do sampling. But essentially, you can see the fens where an awful lot of our food is grown. And I would say that this is not a big opportunity area because we need that food. And there's so many businesses and infrastructure and systems around producing that food. So there's probably little bits they can do to just nudge the water table up. A few crops that would tolerate it, such as celery. But mostly they're locked in to destroy all of that peat. But there are other areas, such as around Manchester, the Somerset, and in the Broads, where we already have wetland farming. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we've talked about the uplands. Most of the national parks here are uplands. And there is a huge potential here for them to go negative. So this is the land carbon dioxide emissions, and most of that is sequestering. Whereas the Broads, all our land emissions are emitting. But if you put the global temperature changes and the temperature changes up north, and we think about all that wildfire, I don't think that they're going to be able to sequester on into the future. I think they're going to have they're not going to be able to achieve. Whereas we are going to have sea level rise, we're going to have more water, so there is greater potential. So I've worked with Cranfield University, they're amazing, and I wanted to cast a whole remember that diagram of you raise water table, it shuts off your carbon emissions. You know, linear relationship. If you can understand what your water table is, then you can draw these diagrams, and that's what we did. We created a model, first time ever had been done, not even in the Netherlands have they done this, where I can drill down into this field here, have a conversation with this farmer and say, does that look about right? Because you cannot see the water table beneath your feet. But that is the thing that controls your, essentially, if you're looking at a carbon market and going for the Michael Gove sort of getting that private finance to come through, along with the public finance, we need to audit that, and we need to go into a credit system, so we need to understand and have a model to base our decision-making around. So this has been amazing. That's for the Waveney Valley, and it shows the freeboard, and I can see, well, where are the low-hanging fruit, where might I work on the average water table. So in the Broads, we've got, so I talked about areas that are connected and not behind flood embankments. These are greyed out here, don't have any colour on. But we do have these lighter areas here, and these are the ones that are drained. They're peat at the surface, and these are our opportunity areas. To have conversations with farmers about doing different, how can you be paid to keep a higher water table. So there's 2,000 hectares of that, so it's quite a big opportunity. And I've put some numbers against, and I'm going to talk about Horsey, which is really quite close to where you're going. Up Hickling Broad is here. It's the biggest broad in the whole of the system. And Horsey Mere is here, and our little field is just north of that. So I'm going to do a little video now, which I hope will work. Maybe it'll go with another click. There you go. The Broads is a mosaic of clay and peat soils. They store a huge amount of carbon, and they're a sponge. And when they're drained for agricultural development, all of that carbon tends to go up to the atmosphere, and we don't have that storage capacity in the floodplain that's so important for the Broads National Park.
Peat soils accumulate under waterlogged conditions in which there's no oxygen. When we drain them, we're introducing oxygen. It allows the bugs in the soil to eat the peat, convert it into carbon. So the deeper the water table is, the greater the greenhouse gas or carbon emissions.
Peat generally accumulates about 1 millimeter per year. This is around about thousands of years of efforts. The peat at the top, so these layers are the one that are the decomposed one, because they have been experiencing the drying cycles all through the years. But as we go down to the bottom, these layers have still their plant structure intact, and they have been like preserving carbons over the years, and if they stay wet, they will continue doing so in the future as well.
We're here at the Langley Abbey Estate, and here with me today is Honai Giovanni from UKCEH. Honai, can you tell us a little bit about the peat monitoring equipment we've got here?
Yes, Andrea. So here we have 2 peat cameras, and with the peat cameras we are trying to monitor the peat surface elevation, how much it moves up and down, responding to changes in the hydrology. This is our peat camera that sits on top of a stool, and the stool is anchored into the peat surface. It's anchored by 10-15 centimeters. We also have an antenna, and the antenna allows the system to send the data to a cloud service in where we can retrieve the data and make it publicly available to everyone. We have a special ruler that we have designed ourselves, and it has Aruco markers, and those Aruco markers are special codes. Our camera can detect where they are, so we can calculate the distance in pixels and in millimeters from those markers to the surface. We can also measure water table depth using a pressure transducer sensor that sits inside this piezometer. It's about 2 meters into the soil. It will allow us to determine whether the pit is in good or in bad condition depending on where the water sits. And also pit subsidence and pit motion is completely related with water table changes, so they basically track each other. With the Flux Tower, we can measure the carbon balance of the ecosystem, so we can determine whether the soil is losing carbon or if we are storing carbon and it's being accumulated into the soil.
So Cranfield University have produced a water table model. So they've cast across the landscape, and that will describe the amount of carbon emissions and also describe the amount of nature, the amount of water that we've got in ditches. How important will that be for the estate?
Of course, you can look into any one of these ditches on a given day and see the height of the water table, but it doesn't always give an accurate reflection of the water table in the field itself. And so having that modelling, we have a much clearer understanding as to where we currently are, but also what we would need to implement to get where we want to be.
So Hanno, what do you hope this project might achieve?
We are hoping to develop a monitoring, reporting and verification tool, and this is something that could be used for carbon credits projects, restoration projects. But in the short term, we are hoping to develop a web app, and then you can actually see what the site is doing, how much the pit has moved up and down, what's the water table depth, what's the soil temperature. And then we're also hoping to help policymakers to take decisions regarding pit condition, and then help them develop policies according to the needs of nowadays.
If farmers can raise their water tables, which in some peats in the country can be as deep as 2 metres, then we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions very quickly from these soils. And with very high water tables, like we'd find under some of the classic broadland fens, we can have almost 0 greenhouse gas emissions. We can switch off the peat soils as a source of greenhouse gases.
Close to the coast in the Broads National Park is the Horsey Estate, and here we're working in partnership to look at a pioneering wetland farming project about the future of farming in Britain's largest protected wetland.
What motivated me to use this land? Really, it was enthusiasm of the Broads Authority, and it's a particularly good site for treating orange, dirty water coming into the Broads.
So we've planted over 20,000 plug plants with the support of some fantastic local volunteers. We're taking water from the river and then we're flowing it through these 5 compartments, like one of the ones behind me here. By opening the sluice, the water flows through. You can see that it's full of ochre, which is this naturally occurring iron compound. We want to filter this out, and we'll do that by flowing the water through this series of reed beds. We're going to be harvesting the reed mace here, and then working with our partners, we're going to be turning that into construction materials such as insulation or pressed board. So really looking at whether we can add value to this crop.
We're working with scientists and policymakers to get paludiculture adopted into agricultural policy and create that network of expertise and knowledge that can be translated into other projects.
So I'm really hopeful here that this site will show how you can make commercial reed or typha growing possible, which would be great.
We're hoping that we can demonstrate how we can re-wet these peaty soils to reduce carbon emissions, and then also how we can grow reed and reed mace for really innovative construction products.
It's not an easy option, but it's a fantastic way of preserving the nature which evolves around peatland.
The main thing I'm hoping this project will achieve will be a successful case study of how farmers can raise their water tables and achieve lower greenhouse gas emissions.
So Henry, what do you hope will be achieved for this project?
So our aspirations here at Langley Abbey is to see a Yare Valley landscape, indeed a wider Broads landscape, teeming with wildlife, all whilst delivering those vital ecosystem services. But of course, it all starts and ends with how we manage our water table and how well we can conserve our peat soils.
This is about rethinking our relationship with nature and finding new ways to work with the changing landscape of the Broads. Okay, that's the first time I've shown that actually. Was it all right? That's good. It's a local filmmaker. He studied at Norwich University of the Arts, and he's still ever so young and fantastic to be involved. It was absolutely freezing doing the filming though. Right. So I'm just going to whiz through. So the demonstration site is here, but look at that. This is the Roman map, isn't it? And that's Great Yarmouth on a sand spit. So you can see how fragile this whole area is. That's Great Yarmouth, yeah. So I think you've seen a lot of this. It's catching up with me. Yeah, I mean, the ticket around this is working with the Internal Drainage Board. So all the farmers, they pay a precept in to ensure that their land is drained, and so do the county councils and local district councils. So this is the conversation we need to have, is how do we just nudge that so we're retaining as much water for the summer. We used a lot of volunteers on this project, sort of develop new ways to, so imagine how long it's taken dry agriculture to get precision and you know, efficient and profitable. Wetland agriculture is something completely new, but we might have to get used to it. So we've been pre-sprouting seeds and wrapping them in little kind of encapsulated bundles so we can take that propagule, so using sugarcane technology and working with different companies. So I've also been working with natural building systems and you know, incorporating our material into boards, basically. This one's got a bit fluffy with all the Typha head. So essentially we can take the fibres, which are microfibrillated, put water with them and squash them and wait for them to dry, or put some heat process in, and we can form an unbonded product. So most of our houses, all of this board that we've got is filled with contaminants, you know, that we're breathing in, and all the new build houses. So this isn't Barratt Home material that we're producing. This is unbonded, free of epoxy toxin, and you know, people will pay for this. We've been to Future Build. We're talking about these recipes, this potential, this locking in of carbon essentially right through. So we can also produce disposable packaging, you know, cardboard. We can pulp this material, but that's single use. So we're looking to lock it in. And we've also been working with, so the fluffy seeds, which I've got an example of, and it seems to be all through my bag, of the Typha, or reed mace, or you might know it as bulrush. So those big cigar heads, when they puff out, they were used in life jackets in the war. You know, they're very buoyant and fluffy. The seeds are extracted, they're felted, and Stella McCartney now runs a line of puffer jackets that you can get, which are completely vegan. And people are buying them. So this is a new wetland product, and that's Horsey Mere. So that you won't go to. But look at that ochre coming down and through. So if we can filter that out, there's benefit here to this designated site that largely does not have any water plants in it anymore because of this impact. And that's because of land drainage, that impact. The biodiversity increases. We've got acoustic monitors out passively just recording the sound of bats and birds, and we know that the boost is huge. We're also looking at, you know, other little crops. So this is marsh fleawort, quite rare. You can eat it. I'm not sure I'd want to, but you know, it's a crispy thing that you might want to nibble on. So in the fens, they're looking at all different sort of bilberries and cranberries and things that could be grown, water mint, you know, botanicals, quite high value crops. But the main thing for us is engaging with all different people that we've had out, and you know, there's been thousands of them go to the Norfolk show. There's Liz Truss there. She really liked the idea that she could wear a wetland product. Yes, so there are payments, and DEFRA are adjusting those payments to, you know, for wetlands. It's a priority for DEFRA, getting that nature and net zero to come together. I wanted to just talk a little bit about deer, if I may. So we're nearly wrapping up here. So sustainable and ethical venison. So that's entirely where we are. We're a very pragmatic group within the national parks. You know, we're not about pure nature conservation. We're about, you know, land managed by private landowners who own our national parks. So I've had a lot of evidence done. I've commissioned apparently the UK's biggest thermal drone survey across this whole area. And we've worked out that these little fellas, the Chinese water deer, are most abundant, then followed by the red deer, then followed by muntjac, and then followed by roe. And for years, and only relatively recently, did the thinking change. Everyone thought these little guys, the Chinese water deer, were wonderful. It didn't really occur anywhere else in the country. They're really quite cute. And what impact are they having? Well, quite a bit, it turns out. So everyone probably knows about the impact they have on woodlands. You go through a woodland, it's got no understory at all. And nightingales, we know, are declining. Those small birds require structure as they come back and they migrate. They nest here. So this is an enclosure where the deer are and the deer are not. And you don't know the difference as you enter into most woodlands because the deer are everywhere. So, you know, a farmer, if they want an incentive to plant a tree from government or a hedgerow, some of them go, oh, I just can't get them established because there's so many deer. There's no point me trying. There's no point unless you help me with that control. Lots of impact on crops. So I've got the photo of a deer's rump there. But these are droppings in the grain store that will be rejected, that whole crop. Thousands of pounds worth of impact just by them being, you know, combining up those droppings. So this is an aerial photo of the Broads. This is a reed bed that's a permanent vegetation. It's in the winter, and I got my contractor to digitize all the trackways. That adds up on average to 11% of the fen. Imagine me asking to destroy 11% of the fen and to get consent from Natural England to do that. But in fact, you know, that is what is happening in our areas. And of course, they're not just walking and destroying, so all these trackways are completely mullering and destroying the peat. It's what they eat as well. So that's, again, an aerial photo where you can see some of these patterns are all the trackways of the deer as they systematically walk up and down, and they're enjoying patches of woodland, and you know, they're lying down in groups here. What about the disease? Yeah, so they have ticks, and it's always worth checking yourself when you go out for a country walk now, because the Lyme's disease is on the increase, absolutely. The projections that we have for Chinese water deer growth are, you know, they can have 7 young per year, and usually 2 or 3 of those survive, so incredibly productive as a deer. And the population that we have now is very much seen as a minimum. It's projected to really, really grow with the climate. And in fact, we've got no natural predators, wolves, nothing to scare. And so this is, a couple of volunteers captured this, and this is a Chinese water deer. Look at its lovely tusks. It really is amazing. I do love them. But it's eating milk parsley. The camera was put on this milk parsley plant, which is very rare in its own right. But because the swallowtail butterfly, eggs and caterpillar were on that plant. So that's what we're seeing, is a loss of the milk parsley, which is the only plant that the caterpillars exist on. It's the only plant that the swallowtail butterfly lay on. So we're looking at a potential extinction of our, you know, the only place in the UK where there's swallowtail butterfly. So if you're at all motivated by that, we've got a crowdfunder that's up and running at the moment, and we're trying to get a coordinator in place to coordinate venison supply across Norfolk. We'll be aiming to send that to Sizewell, who will have a huge number of meals that they have to provide for their workers in just a few years' time. They're investing themselves in abattoirs, and they want that good quality meat, which, you know, it is. If anyone's eaten a Chinese water deer, it's lovely. And I don't eat much meat at all, but I do eat venison because I feel it's such a good and healthy meat. So, you know, we want to get that going. We've got some estates that are providing free bolognese, fresh bolognese, to food hubs in Norwich, which is fantastic. So we can do this, but deer managers are generally volunteers who are uncoordinated and are quite secretive about what they do, and they just work with the farmer. So we want to really kind of, you know, get some standards within that and get some collaboration across the landscape. So the Broads Authority has already funded deer management to the tune of, you know, over 150,000 over the last year. If you know, I'm sure you can find this address if you just do crowdfunder deer Norfolk, you will get to it. So if you're motivated by that, we'd really welcome it. We've got another sort of 49 days to run on it, and it will be directly match funded by Norfolk County Council. So we're aiming for 10,000 that we get from the crowdfunder. I've already put 2,000 of my budget into it, and then we'll get a match from Norfolk County Council. Just finally, I wanted to talk to you about another sustainable thing that happens on the land in the Broads, which is reed bed management. So around about, I don't know if I've got, these are some images of, you know, you wouldn't have crane in the Broads if there weren't these wonderful cut areas. They are queuing up in the sky and on the ground to go in after these guys have moved off in February. These guys then move in. And this, I think, is the adaptation going forwards, because if we look at that, that's a disaster if you've got farming, but if you've got a reed bed, it's not so much of a disaster. You've still got a crop. So we essentially have got 35 active cutters in the UK. They produce that number, and that equates to 2.6% of our demand. So the imports are huge. You know, China, Ukraine, Russia, still they come, you know, Turkey, but they're all coming with a colossal carbon footprint when we need just 5,000 hectares. And I've shown you that 2,000 hectares as our strategic area of drained peat. So this is achievable, to get 5,000 hectares and to get more people working out on the land, but we obviously need, you know, this is Paul, my mate Paul. But we want people with big machines to do it properly. We don't want people walking behind machines. We need to revolutionise. So DEFRA are interested in this. And we've been funding. So this shows you some of the cutters, but yeah, most of them are in the Broads, 17 cutters. Hickling, I think this is my last slide. I've probably overrun. I go swimming. I went swimming this morning. I didn't go swimming in Hickling. It's a bit too far for me to go. But this is me and my camera. And what I wanted to say is it's lovely down there. It really is nice. And over the last few years, Hickling has got even lovelier. And underneath the water, as you go along, and if you go slowly, which you probably will, you'll probably see some of these beds. They're plants, but actually they're algae. So they're complex colonial algae that have branched out into sort of structures that look like stems and leaves. In fact, these are whorls. So they're colonial algae, and they're incredibly fragile because vascular plants have got a lot of protection with a big stem and the stele walls and all these sorts of things that protect them from pollution. These little guys are really sensitive. There's just one cell wall between them and any of the chemical that's in the water, whether that's good or bad or whatever, the salt, the nutrients. And these have made a resurgence, so it's absolutely a fantastic story. So in the Upper Thurn around Hickling, they never really lost all the water plants that they have in other parts of the Broads. So, yeah, there's a lot of information on our website and so on about the different phases. So a lot of the Broads are in this phase, they're fairly turbid, and Hickling Broad has returned to this all on its own. So it's a complete celebration. The boaters don't particularly like that because the Broad is so shallow, 1.5 metres deep at max, 1.2 outside the channel, and there is a conflict because these do grow quite high, and that can stop the rudders going through. It's not the racing, sailing venue that it used to be. But these plants don't occur anywhere else in the whole of the UK. So we've got a duty to keep them like that. I think that's it.
Thank you, Andrea, very much indeed. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. All that scientific and technical content and the economic links as well. We have a few minutes, I think, 5 minutes or so for some questions. I'm just going to ask a slightly cheeky question first. You alluded to this at the end about swimming, but what is most fun for you about the experience of the Broads and the enjoyment of the Broads? What do you most like about it?
I have done so many different things. I like doing the different. So every year my projects evolve. But I suppose I'm most motivated by working with, most recently, farmers, because they have such a complex job of managing all that they manage. They're cheek by jowl with potato and the most high-value soils next to the most protected wetland. So that job is a balancing act. They're incredibly patient. They listen to me, which is incredibly patient. And yet they've got all of these different elements to manage themselves. So I'm in deep sympathy for them, but they hold the key. And if we can get the policies right and the incentives right, they can protect the Broads on into the future. So that's my big focus.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, questions, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Karen has a question, and then Ron.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Could you give us one tick to bring you the mic, Karen, and then we'll catch the question on the YouTube.
Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation, Andrea. Just two very specific questions about sustainability that you alluded to at the end. What is the ultimate aim of the, I would call it, culling of the Chinese water deer? What are you hoping to get to? And will 5,000 acres, what percentage of demand would the 5,000 acres of reed beds give you? Because
So in terms
at the
of-
moment you're
yeah.
saying you're covering just a very small percentage, but how could you grow that?
Okay, so those 5,000 hectares would be a bank-to-bank cut. It would be the whole of the unit. So probably we would want a buffer. You'd never want to cut absolutely everything because you'd want some sort of synergy with nature. But that is the quantity of reed that we need to thatch 100% of our buildings. So it's not much, is it? That's what used to be from these wetlands and many of those other little wetlands around the UK. Obviously, we've lost 90% of our wetlands over the past decades. So the existing wetlands that we have feel very precious. So if you're a manager of a wetland, a conservation organisation, you're going to be really cautious about someone coming in to do some cutting, even though that was historic cutting and so very precautionary, which has been an issue for extending the reed cutting on existing sites because lots of them become nature reserves, you see. So there's a lot of concern and constraint. But I believe that cutting areas in a mosaic is really healthy for species. So in terms of the deer numbers, it's incredibly challenging. We've got, again, a lot of conservation landowners in the Broads, and they've got members. And those members, quite a lot of them don't really understand the dynamics, the impact that the deer are having. That's why we're trying to communicate that outwards with yourselves and others. So they don't understand that. So there is a pushback and a backlash about deer control and deer management. So that's where we feel that the population reductions that we need to make, and we're beginning to model those now because we've got such good data on the numbers, sort of 30% reduction, or, where do we need to be? Just standing still is going to require some thousands of deer to be culled. And to make a reduction is going to require, maybe 50% of the deer to be culled because they're continually breeding. We've got to focus on not just the stags, which a lot of people who come here to hunt red deer, to trophy hunting, we need to focus on the hinds because they're the productive part of the population. So there's a lot of modelling, and the government are now beginning to incentivise landowners who do collaborate and are professional in what they do, and supply through with the venison and make it all sustainable. There are now incentives coming for woodlands, and what my work and our work is demonstrating there's impact now on wetlands as well, and we need those incentives to come for our farmers to get these payments as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And this is going to be the last question from Ron.
Thanks very much. I found that absolutely fascinating. I wouldn't have had any clue that deer were a major problem in East Anglia. I come from an area in northern Scotland where we are well aware of the destructive impact that the deer have on any plan to regenerate the Scottish deciduous forests. I just wonder how in all earth did you allow the numbers of deer to get to that standard?
I know.
And you've just mentioned it in your response to the previous question, but I mean, do you have Norfolk gillies that go out with shooting partners? Because I know that in Scotland, these gillies can earn hundreds of pounds a day leading shooting parties. I don't know whether that's feasible in this environment. I mean, I'm just staggered that deer is an issue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Shooting has generally been pheasants and the odd stag shooting, that trophy hunting. So that does go on. There's certainly a market within it. People are interested in shooting, aren't they? They'll pay for a good day of sport. But the estates who got conservation in mind and they want to get the deer numbers down, or they want to reduce the impact on their crops, are generally employing people to do things as professionally and as quietly as possible. I know there's another crowdfunder actually out there which is training up veterans to be deer managers because they've got the firearms capability, they've got the training, the mentality. There's people everywhere across our landscape now going out for a run or a swim like me, or people trespassing across the state. So people have to be very, very careful when they do high-powered, rifles over long distances using thermal cameras. They have to know what they're doing because one wrong move, and that's a really bad story. So there's an awful lot to think about as we do this. But I have spoken to people in counterparts in Cairngorm, and since the 1950s, they've had deer collaboration groups with proper secretariat talking about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and monitoring the plants back into that. So great review. And now the government is asking them to reduce yet more and putting some standards around the population. Yes, we don't have that in the UK, and I don't know why not, really. And it would be much easier to introduce lynx or wolves, but perhaps that's even harder.
Okay. I know one or two of you have got follow-on questions, but I think we've probably run out of time. So I'm going to encourage you to have a chat with Andrea in the break we're about to have. I just want to thank you very much indeed on behalf of all of us, Andrea. We have a small thank you of a drinkable sort. So
thank you.
It's been absolutely fantastic.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
The following round of applause is for you. And let me just check if there are any public information announcements before we break for
We have
lunch.
one over here with Water Mills and Marshes.
I know I'm just adding to the Buffalo's Lips Fest as we are having today, with all the books being promoted. This is a wonderful book about Water Mills and Marshes, about the life and work on the Broads. One of our Buffalo's members was an editor of this book, Ollie Gotts, sitting back there. And it's a fascinating insight into local people, scientists, environmentalists, people from all different walks of life. Please do tick on the flyers, and Ollie will ensure that you can have that buy one online or from her directly. And Andrea would like to give you a copy of this personally.
Really?
You know you have read it.
I haven't seen it. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to love that.
Sorry that doesn't come for you, but you'll just have to.
Thank you.
Nikki, thank you very much indeed. That's great. Thank you.